I am Dr. Panchali Sen from St. Xavier's College, Autonomous, Kolkata, India. At the outset, I wish to thank University of Social and Media Culture in Torun, Poland, for giving me the opportunity to present my paper at the International Interdisciplinary Scientific Conference on Communication and Culture, New Media, New Opportunities, and New Perspectives. My paper focuses on the theme Communicating Sustainable Development. 36 years after Our Common Future by the Brundtland Commission in 1987, sustainable development remains the only internationally and consensually recognized global development concept. The role of mass media as a significant information channel and agenda setter for sustainability communication has to be critically considered. We hypothesize that the media predominantly informs people and sets the agenda by communicating themes of current interest, that is, gender inequalities, poverty, etc., but misses the opportunity of framing them in the broader overarching concept of sustainable development. This may be a significant sustainability error, as great political intentions need efficient implementation tools and not just political resolutions. To this end, we need well-narrated and framed sustainability themes communicated through mass media to activate the social norms that potentially support societally beneficial conduct. By undertaking an extensive mass media analysis, my paper offers analysis on sustainability communication by the global mass media during the last 15 years and will try to identify the main caveats and challenges for sustainability proponents. As sustainability communication does not yet have its own theoretical framework, Sustainable Development Goals seem to offer a suitable mechanism for this. The Sustainable Development Goals aim to transform our world. Also known as the Global Goals, they are adopted by the United Nations in 2015 as a universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that by 2030, all people enjoy health, justice, and prosperity. The 17 SDGs are integrated. They recognize that action in one area will affect outcomes in others, and that development must balance social, economic, and environmental sustainability. Countries have committed to prioritize progress for those who are furthest behind. The SDGs are designated to end poverty, hunger, provide sanitation and healthcare facilities, preventing the spread of HIV/AIDS, and discrimination against women and girls. The creativity, know-how, technology, and financial resources from all of society is necessary to achieve the SDGs in every context. The beauty of the goals is that everyone can contribute, and every contribution, big or small, will make an impact on our world. In the industry sector, we have seen how the goals have shaped the business environment, and for the better. The Paris Climate Agreement alone has helped open up about $23 trillion US dollars in business opportunities for emerging markets for climate smart investments. Working primarily in developing and transitional countries, we see the impact, both the negative impact of the changing environment and the growing inequality, but also the positive impact of the goals and how they are helping create better opportunities for local communities. We have to use this momentum and keep pushing towards achieving the goals so we can create a better world for us all. Organizations worldwide are increasing their efforts to help achieve the goals, especially SDGs referring directly to economic growth, sustainable industrialization, innovation, and sustainable production, which have attracted a lot of attention within major industries. However, lately, SDGs aimed towards improving human rights have garnered more attention as well. We have started seeing a project-specific focus on gender equality, where there is a need for applying practices to reduce inequality. Reducing inequality has always been an important part of our work because we work in the local communities and we see how important it is. Gender inequality is unmistakably one of the biggest obstacles to overcome poverty, as it subjects women to discrimination, which in many cultures results in denial of rights to education, to positions of power, and any real voice in decision-making in the society. Breaking inequality is therefore pivotal, and I think we will see rapid improvement within science, politics, and business when we successfully include more women in development, which is the focus of SDG 5. Global development issues, including poverty and hunger, will not be solved without leadership. A dedicated goal, that is SDG 11, focused on cities and human settlements, calls for the leadership of local governments, yet the role of local actors extends beyond achieving the SDG 11. Major cross-cutting links between sustainable development, urbanization, and local governments need to be carefully planned. Local governments in urban, peri-urban, and rural areas are best placed to link all global goals within their areas of work to benefit their local communities. As the global population is becoming increasingly urban, cities will eventually determine the country's successes and failures. Equally critical is how urban communities interact with peri-urban and rural neighbors to address the effective resource and service provision needed to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. To become catalysts of change, whether in addressing poverty, gender equality, or sustainable infrastructure, local governments require additional political and financial powers to implement new changes. Our world is shaken by war, terrorism, and widespread local conflicts, especially in poverty-affected regions. According to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, over 15 million refugees, as of the date of 2013, had to flee to other states, while even greater numbers of people were internally displaced refugees in their own countries. Furthermore, malfunctioning institutions and justice systems remain a huge obstacle to tackling sustainability issues. It is estimated that bribery, corruption, and tax evasion alone cost some 1.2 trillion US dollars for the developing world annually. As many of the conflicts have a local dimension, I also keep in mind here the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, and wish to mention that peace and inclusion are inextricably linked to the transparency and accountability of local governments and institutions. Cities offer a great range of opportunities for capacity building at all levels of government and provide platforms for dialogue and democratic decision making. Inclusive spatial planning and urban design, accompanied by effective local institutions, are important frameworks for peaceful society. Conflict-stricken areas demand concrete local actions and resources to relieve the affected population and mediate further conflicts. At the core of the 2030 agenda lies a clear understanding that human rights, peace and security and development are deeply interlinked and mutually reinforcing. Through its entirety, the importance of enhancing access to justice, ensuring safety and security, and promoting human rights for sustainable development are reflected, while Sustainable Development Goal 16 marks the intersection between sustaining peace and the 2030 agenda. I wish to remind all of us at this point the focal theme of Goal 16, which aims to promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable and inclusive institutions at all levels. During the past years, many parties within the United Nations have progressively described how the rule of law and human rights are imperative to achieving and sustaining peace, as well as to realizing the vision now set forth through the Sustainable Development Goals. The threats of international homicide, violence against children, human trafficking, and sexual violence are important to address to promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development. They pave the way for the provision of access to justice for all and for building effective, accountable institutions at all levels. While homicide and trafficking cases have been significant over the last few decades, significant as issues over the last few decades, there are still thousands of people at greater risk of intentional murder, particularly within Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and around Asia. Women and children's rights violations through aggression and sexual violence continue to plague many countries around the world, especially as underreporting and lack of data aggravate the problem. To tackle these challenges and build a more peaceful, inclusive society, there needs to be more efficient and transparent regulations put in place and comprehensive, realistic government budgets. One of the first steps towards protecting individual rights is the implementation of independent national human rights institutions around the world. The importance of SDG 16 begs a question of how difficult will it be to achieve. Measuring progress towards achieving the proposed goal and targets is problematic. But there is a wealth of governance-related data produced both by multilateral organizations and NGOs. The data does suggest some positive long-term trends on individual areas within the goal, that is Goal 16. But here the phrase long-term is important. There are also a significant number of states that remain a substantial distance away from achieving the overall goal. The world we want mentioned above signals that large numbers of people view their national and local institutions as falling below the lines. SDG 16 is important but extremely difficult to meet by 2030 on the current trajectories. However, rather than admit defeat, supporters of SDG 16 need to focus on potential drivers of change in the area of governance. Political paths to SDG 16, perhaps the single biggest factor that impacts on the rate of change in governance reform in countries and politics. All institutions operate within the context of politics, and any hope of progress rests within the political arena. Alan Waits mentions about certain political dimensions, which includes issues both of the political settlement and also in relation to social constituencies and public engagement. For the former, the overused term political will is a misnomer. The real nexus between politics and institutions is often rooted in the actual options available to those who dominate political settlements in their management of power. In his significant paper, States in Development, published in 2008, he argued that the way in which states evolve is shaped by a dynamic relationship between a range of factors, none of which can be considered in isolation and each influencing and changing the other. Within this dynamic of political settlements, also influencing state development, and in the theory, at least might be influenced towards greater inclusion and better governance. Unfortunately, however, the relationship between political settlements and institutions has not been well explored, including how institutions in turn influence their dominant political settlements. So the question, how does politics end up with the institutions it wants? A subsequent World Bank study on the post-conflict public sector, the study conducted in 5 countries, looked at the link between institutions and political stability and found that issues such as pay, the numbers employed were part of a trade-off relationship with issues of effectiveness and delivery. For ruling elite coalitions, the civil service can be a means of managing power using multiple approaches simultaneously. The balance will depend on internal and external pressures. Institutional effectiveness can matter more in environments with an acute sense of threat or risk, focusing the minds of the leaders. In focusing on the relationship between political settlements and institutions, it is therefore important not to lose sight of the evidence of popular concern and frustration. Social movements and social constituencies also impact on politics significantly. Politics, therefore, can both be a drag and a spur to institutional progress, depending on the relationship, capacity, and pressures faced by political settlements and their willingness to respond to social constituencies in relation to the organized instruments of the state. SDG 16 cannot be delivered by a single community or group. National governments have the greatest impact, but many actors will be important in making a leap forward to achieve the goal. The question is whether those actors will enhance the impact of each other's efforts or dissipate impact through incoherent approaches. The challenges set out above call for an emphasis on political influence and advocacy where more voices can help. Equally, innovation in external support suggests greater attention to mutually leveraging the impact of either programs or new instruments, and an ability to measure that will require diverse access to information. Can we be SDG 16 believers? Alan Waits, recognizing the role of aid within a changing context of wider development finance, emphasizes alliances and collaborations will be central to any contribution towards progress in terms of SDG 16. David Stephen, in his study, has also suggested that to achieve SDG 16 in this time frame, that is by 2030, we need to be in a high-speed train. But actually, we are in a donkey cart. And so the task is to change our carts into a train. Perhaps the starting point for that process are steps to build these far wider and more fluid collaborative initiatives among stakeholders, working as partners to reach out to governments and political actors. Even if the high-speed train does not deliver the whole goal, it remains the case that getting as close to the destination as possible will surely make a difference to the constituencies that matter most, that is, the communities globally, who have voiced their call for institutions that work and work inclusively and accountably. At this juncture, it is most fundamental to talk about a free, independent and pluralist media sector, and here I emphasize on the new media platforms, as a prerequisite to the creation and sustaining of functioning democracies, supporting the creation of peaceful, just and inclusive society. The media role in supporting public access to information, which specifically focuses on SDG target 16.10, is thus valuable by itself to achieving SDG 16 plus. Both traditional forms of media, including print, television media and radio, and social media, can support efforts to advance SDG 16 plus implementation and accountability in a number of ways. In relation to the SDG 16 plus implementation, the media can educate and promote awareness of all the dimensions of SDG 16 issues among the general public. It can provide information on the status of SDG 16 plus targets and influence the opinions of key decision makers and the general public to take action for progress towards peaceful, just and inclusive societies. Importantly, the media can foster participation in SDG 16 plus implementation by encouraging public involvement in national and subnational development, as well as decision-making processes, and by providing a platform for public debate and dialogue, ensuring that the voices of all citizens are heard. In relation to SDG 16 plus accountability, the media can monitor and report on government policies and practices to advance peace, justice and inclusion, highlighting progress, challenges and gaps in implementation. Online platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, Google+, YouTube, Instagram can be a very effective way to share information, raise awareness and mobilize supporters for action on SDG 16 plus issues, especially younger generations who may not engage as much with traditional forms of media. But the use of social media and online platforms is not without its limitations or risks. Many populations continue to be excluded from internet access due to poverty, geography, and other barriers. The discussion of potentially sensitive governance-related issues via social media can result in government crackdowns on both users and networks. In some cases, social media may facilitate the distribution of inaccurate, discriminatory, and even willfully violent content. These are all real challenges for civil society. Consequently, the use of social media and online platforms for SDG 16 plus engagement should always be carefully considered, monitored and balanced with other forms of engagement that permit the safe offline participation of excluded groups. Teaching journalism and communications to marginalized youth, women and the Dalit community is one positive step of moving forward. As one of the case studies, we must acknowledge the efforts of the Bangladesh NGO's Network for Radio and Communications, which implemented a fellowship program from 2013 to 2020 to reduce social discrimination against disadvantaged communities and increase participation of youth from marginalized communities by teaching them skills for journalism and community radio broadcasting. This program empowered youth, women and marginalized people to become actors in their communities and increase the number of young professionals, particularly women, working in community media in Bangladesh. These empowerment efforts helped communities exercise their right and influence local power structures and share information within their communities. I must mention here about the UNDP report as of January 2019, which features 13 case studies that together highlight the range and impact of the UNDP's engagement with the media for the purpose of achieving development outcomes. These examples vary widely in scope and aim, from an election media monitoring initiative in Georgia to an initiative promoting local empowerment through community radio in remote areas of the People's Democratic Republic, and also from engagement with media for peace building in Lebanon to sustainable development goals, awareness campaigns implemented in partnership with the private sector in Brazil, just to highlight a few of the case studies made. By mentioning these successful examples of UNDP's media initiatives, certain factors can be highlighted. Firstly, these reports, they demonstrate that across development contexts, the UNDP has increasingly identified media engagement as a priority for its policy and programs. Indeed, the case studies show that there is growing recognition that engaging the media has become indispensable for making progress on inclusive governance, peace and development outcomes, and ultimately for achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Secondly, the report seeks to outline UNDP's comparative advantage and unique role in this area of work, as well as to spark new approaches on media engagement and build new partnerships with media actors. And finally, by delving into the challenges and lessons learned across UNDP's initiatives, their reports, when studied, they seek to contribute to broader debates among a range of stakeholders on how to design more effective and sustainable policies and programs to support the roles of the media in several countries, which can better meet the needs and challenges of today's complex media ecosystems. There are many more UNDP media initiatives than the 13 case studies that I have considered. UNESCO has partnered with UNDP to launch online consultation to combat disinformation and address the ever more urgent concern for those working to build informed and inclusive societies. The consultation, which has been themed as Forging a Path for a Better Information Ecosystem, Effective Governance, Media, Internet and Peace-Building Responses to Disinformation, aims to gather innovative evidence, experiences and perspectives on the impact of disinformation. We all know disinformation erodes public trust in state institutions and news media, widening social divides and destabilizing already fragile environments. It can hurt public health outcomes as well as compromise long-term democratic and human rights advancements. Both UNESCO and UNDP have supported responses by other stakeholders to tackle disinformation. The two organizations also collaborate on initiatives concerning media and elections. This is a very important component, particularly in the context of democracy, to thrive all over the world, and therefore becomes critical that we have effective capabilities to counter information pollution. Yet in the context of elections, this is a relatively new field. Promoting information integrity, global reflections from electoral stakeholders reflects valuable insights from representatives of academia, civil society, media, private sector and governments in addressing the complex problem of information integrity, particularly in elections. These insights offer reflections on existing and emerging challenges, analysis of current programmatic approaches, programming considerations and recommendations of a range of stakeholders working on electoral assistance. I wish to end my presentation by emphasizing or highlighting UNESCO's role and contribution, particularly in the context of managing the COVID-19 pandemic. The UNESCO has addressed the causes and consequences of disinformation surrounding COVID-19 as part of its mandate to promote freedom of information and freedom of expression on any medium and regardless of frontiers. To tackle the COVID-19 disinfodemic, UNESCO published 2 policy briefs analyzing the spread of viral disinformation on the coronavirus and outlining a typology of responses to the threat. UNESCO has also offered massive online training courses for journalists in order to provide them with the necessary verification tools and knowledge to cover the health crisis. In addition, UNESCO issued guidelines on international standards on freedom of expression, access to information, privacy, and the safety of journalists for when judicial operators rule on cases when fundamental rights are restricted by responses to the pandemic outbreak. As co-founders of the Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development, UNESCO and the International Telecommunication Union released Balancing Act, Countering Digital Disinformation While Respecting Freedom of Expression in September 2020. The comprehensive study provides a profile of sector-specific actionable recommendations and a 23-point framework to test disinformation responses at the global level. Other actions undertook by the UNESCO related to disinformation include the translation in multiple languages of the Handbook of Journalism, Fake News and Disinformation, as well as the funding of a joint project with the European Union to minimize the impact of COVID-19 disinformation. Thank you.